Welcome everyone to the Healthy Home podcast, where I have the privilege of talking with the world's leading innovators and educators who embrace the idea of non-toxic living. And today I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Daniel T. Debaun, who is the leading expert in the field of electromagnetic frequency radiation protection, author of the best-selling book Radiation Nation, and founder of Defender Shield, the trusted world leader in EMF and 5G radiation shielding. We're also joined by Mr. Edwin Loh, a wellness advocate and solutions provider who brings with him over 20 years of insights in running wellness programs within Singapore. And I'm Jensen, your host, and it's my pleasure to facilitate a powerful exchange in this session. So thank you, Dr. Daniel, and thank you, Edwin, for being here with us to share your expert insights.
Well, Jen, thanks so much for inviting us. I'm excited about chatting about the subject I'm passionate about and have been for many, many years. So I'm excited to talk to your audience.
Thank you so much.
I'm Edwin, from Singapore. So I've been in the the health industry for about 20 over years. And I've been promoting health through the public forums and seminars. And I even wrote a book talking about the major ingredients of health, including the air, including the water, the nutrients from food, as well as the sunshine, also a couple of the exercises to go with it. And for about 15 years ago, I started to realize that there is one pollution, which is essentially we have not looked at it, even inside my book. That one we call it EMF. Okay. So, and I quickly organized a series of talk. I talk in the churches, I talk in the public forums, and promoting it. At the time, people are still do not know much about this problem. But according to what I know, because some students and some audience, in my public seminars, came to talk to me, about the sensitivity to the EMF. Some so sensitive that they are having digestive problems, sleepless night, nervousness, and agitated, emotional instability, so on and so forth. So this is why I'm so concerned about this one invisible, the kind of pollution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel and Edwin, for such a brilliant introduction. So today I'm so happy that we're all united in the area of health and wellness, and we're going to home in into this idea or this knowledge about EMFs, of which all of you are experts. And with that said, I would like to open up with the first question. Dr. Daniel, what do you think, or what is the one thing that people of today need to know about EMFs?
It's very influential to the human body. As Edwin was pointing out, it is a toxin. It's a recently identified toxin. It's new to the human body, and it's trying to figure out how to work with that toxin as it does any other toxin. So as a starting point, it can be, for some of us, not even something we can feel, but for others, it can have a major influence. To talk a little bit about what Edwin was talking about, electric hypersensitivity, which is a symptom of exposures to radio frequency signals or low frequency radiation. It can be very, very debilitating. As you pointed out, the stomach and the correlated immunity as it relates to the stomach. It can be the head. It can be the heart, and it is impactful to the human body and can debilitate that body to the extent where you actually can be so foggy in your brain or so debilitating with your body that you lie in bed and can't move forward as a result of those exposures. We know of many extreme cases. But it's also true that electromagnetic radiation over the last 50 years, it was miles away. And today, it's literally in our pockets. It's around everything we do. The cell phones you use, the laptops you use, the tablets you use, all are using RF signals, Wi-Fi signals, Bluetooth signals, cellular connections to satellite, to cell towers. All of these devices are now really literally right on top of us. And there is evidence, worldwide evidence, that it can be as dangerous as creating more severe problems other than electromagnetic hypersensitivity, including cancer. We know from the studies in the U.S., the National Toxicity Program, we spent $25,000 U.S., $25 million U.S., and after a statistically significant study, that is, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of populations studied, there were found to be elevated, significant increases in frontal lobe cancer and heart cancers. So we knew that. And then in Italy, they had the Ramazzani Institute, which was an identical epidemiology study that talked about the impact with large populations of study, and they had similar findings. So when you have independent laboratory study work that's done on the subject matter, it's almost always, it is impactful and can infect your body in some form, and it can be extreme in some worst cases.
Yeah, thank you so much for that overview on the topic, Dr. Daniel. Edwin, do you have any thoughts about that in relation to all your past efforts of 20 years? And can you say a little bit about how has this idea or this knowledge been catching wind, and what were some of perhaps the challenges of people embracing the idea and adopting it?
I have been in the health industry. I don't call it as a health industry actually, but it's in the health knowledge sharing for about 20 over years period. And over time, there are many things that concerning about health, which are able to affect our health, not only just the food. I discovered that, and it's not just the nutrition. We're talking about something that you ingest, So how about the environment? How about something that which is invisible to us, and yet it has a very profound impact on our health? Take for example, the air. Okay, take a very keen interest in the air, air pollution, especially for the past about 40 years. I witnessed the air quality, especially in the urban area, it start to deteriorate, due to the pollutions or, the industrialization and so on and so forth. And another thing that on top of that, because of the urbanization, the intensity of the electromagnetic force becomes, the more and more a serious concern, especially when I come to this part. I got the students, okay, she's very sensitive to the EMF surrounding her workplace. She told me that, so that come to that's raised an alarm for me to really look into the consequences or the effects of the EMF surrounding us, especially in Singapore, because we are living in the high-rise building. We are living in the flatted housing estates. That means that every household, in particular, I should say that almost 100%, if not 99% of the household should have their Wi-Fi devices and appliance, connected to the Wi-Fi, say, routers, or smartphone, okay, that kind of thing. And that thing, because we are living in the flatted housing, the density of the different devices, so the radiation becomes very, very strong, because take for example, if I live in the second floor, I'm not only have to contend with what we have in my house, in my room, it's also something that how about on top, on the third floor, as well as the lower floor, the EMF interference will be very much in evidence, So that means that in short term, our life is being surrounded by all kinds of electromagnetic forces and interference. And for this reason, lately, not lately, I should say about 10 over years ago, I'm start to search for a solution, a shield, which is that's supposed to reduce the damage and the harmful effects of the electromagnetic interference. Yeah. Just now I mentioned about the population density. We are not, in Singapore in particular, the density, we're not just talking about the horizontal. We are talking about the vertical. So it's very dense, So practically every household has their own devices, doing, broadcasting, doing the Wi-Fi, and so on and so forth. And in time to come, I say, okay, come 5G, perhaps I think we start to use the Wi-Fi a lot more because to control different appliances. And all this add up to the intensity. And I should say that the air, beside the air that we breathe, we can't stop, that the effects of the electromagnetic force will be much more evidence and serious, okay, than the, say, the water pollution or than the food problems and all these things, okay? Because we are being, immersed into the space at which is practically enveloped by the, the EMF, okay? And for this reason, in my house, okay, or in any working space, and I'm going to stay for quite some time, I installed certain anti-radiation device, and this one, I think to a certain degree it helped, okay, and of course, certain electromagnetic interference can be measured, very easily. Take for example the radiations from the AC currents. Talking about the LED lamps. Talking about the operations of the motorized devices. For example, the fans and all this, the compressors used by the fridge. All these can be, readily and easily measured. But as the frequency start to rise, and start to begin into the megahertz and gigahertz, and perhaps very soon we will have the terahertz. That thing could be much more penetrating and much more intense, and I should say that the effect will be much more profound, if not harmful. There's a study, take for example, even the adult, which is sensitive to the EMF, because different people response to the electromagnetic interference differently. And just now I mentioned about one of my students, when she will work in the office environment, of course, modern days office environment will be surrounded by computer. Many things, also including the smartphones and so on and so forth. The moment she enter, okay, the space, she feel like, the mood start to change and becomes agitated, okay, stomach start to have a problems and becomes hypersensitive and hyperactive. And for this reason, actually, we are talking about the EMF interference for every household. If it happens to have a kid or somebody which is more or less hypersensitive to the interference, they should really concern and try to apply certain remedial action and applications of certain device or certain shield to minimize the electromagnetic interference. On top of that, there's there are, I think, many studies in the market that reflecting the harmful effect of allowing these small little kids, earlier exposure to the smartphone and the also the so-called computers devices. One of the effect actually is is depression, aggressive behavior. Okay, and also start to see other people's, start to tend them and start to see the other people's as just the objects, the kind of thing. And this is very much reflect the problems of this electromagnetic interference.
Edwin, you were mentioning about ADHD and other forms of mental influence, and we know that through some studies that a Wi-Fi signal in a classroom, which didn't exist 10, 15 years ago, is now up to as much as 0.5 watts per kilogram. 0.5 watts. In other words, it's 6 times higher than it was 10 years ago, and it's 8 hours a day. And so the idea of having that radio frequency exposure has, in studies, shown that it does impact the brain. Foggy thinking, the delays in response, there's all sorts of observations, but it's not scientific significant yet. So have you seen in a classroom that problem? Because it's 8 hours a day for the kids, and it's all the Wi-Fi around them, including in their desktop.
My son actually is a professional teacher for the ADHD kids, So lady, for the past about, maybe decade or 20 years, he saw the steady rise of the ADHD, the sufferers. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you look at the modernization with the introductions of the internet, with the introductions of the mobile phone, and subsequently with the introductions of the smartphone, and this, you can see the correlation between the rise of the modern technology as compared to the rise of the ADHD problems. Yeah. So, and I think in one of my talks given a couple of years back, there are studies, overseas, saying that those classrooms, which is near the tower, the transmitting tower for the Wi-Fi signals, and the students suffer from various kinds of the behavioral problems. Okay, and you start to see the rise of all this. But unfortunately, because all this study about the harmful of the EMF, to the body, cannot be funded, heavily. Partly, as you know, because if the finding which is detrimental to the development and the progress of the modern technology, of course, nobody would like to fund it, and no industry which are related to the, to the study of the harmful of the EMF would like to see that the study start to go against their development. Yeah. So for this reason, as you mentioned, Jensen, saying that the study, the results are not so significant, partly because it's industrial related. Yeah. So but then again, because it will require and depends on the independent studies, you definitely need to have a fund. The funding must come, but who going to fund that? Nobody going to fund that, So for this reason, even though we know, I'm guessing many people would agree that EMF is having harmful effects, for everybody, even though the magnitude can be different, from a person to the other. But then again, this one is nobody going to really say, I publish it now, because as you control, as you know, media also are being funded, by the industries, because they need, the revenue might be from ads and all this and so on and so forth.
Yep. That's great. There's basically there's little profits to preservation. At least it's no direct line to that.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you. Worldwide, it's not identified. However, in areas like France, they don't allow Wi-Fi in the classroom for that reason. And so some parts of the world are beginning to understand it, but unfortunately, not the entire world.
Yes, I agree. Take for example, locally, we don't seems to have any official guideline about, about the Wi-Fi, about the usage of the smartphone. Not even a clear control, to limit the smartphone, to gaming and so on and so forth for the students and younger ones. There isn't any control at all. I should say that the EMF, the exposure, the exposures of the EMF is very much, the harmful effect is very much depends on how long the duration that you are being exposed to. Take for example, you just having a few minutes to check on the smartphone and to check on the the computer by internet to read and to find out some of the information. I think that is fine, But if you were to stick to the smartphone and computer for say 8 hours or even 20 hours, for example, the gaming, or over the whole night, that would cause it would be harmful, not just because of the EMF, also for the the inactivity, the kind of the sitting posture being unchanged for the long period, also including the breathing, all this will be affected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was such a powerful exchange over there, talking about ADHD, and so many things came up. Things like, I had so many questions for you, Dr. Daniel, now about ADHD, about who are susceptible and its susceptibility, and the vulnerable. Is there reversibility? So many questions to ask. But one theme that came up to me as I looked at this conversation is that both you are kind of like the same generational bracket, and me, a little younger, maybe 2-3 generations before. And what's
Edwin, he's calling you old, by the way.
No, I'm saying then you look absolutely healthy, healthy and young. But the theme that came in my mind was humans of the future, and the reason for that is that the only reason why we pay attention to this is because it's a long-term effect, and people that are of advanced ages, they may not worry so much about themselves, but for the next generation, right? Humans of the future, and that's why we're even talking about ADHD and about children. We're concerned about the next generation. So my question for you, Dr. Daniel, is that how does one evolve from being normal, say, to being now developing sensitivities? Is it inherent? Is it developed? Is there reversibility in all that?
Before I answer the question, I need to explain a little bit why I was asking the questions of Edwin. It turns out that when you're exposed to an RF signal, Dr. Ali Johansson in Sweden, his life work was around electric hypersensitivity. And he talks about the blood-brain barrier breaking down when you use a cell phone. So your immune system itself is being suppressed when using the RF signal around you. So there are very physical things that are literally occurring. And it's not unusual, as Edward pointed out, that you have a problem with the gut. Well, that's where immune system sort of has a major part of recovery in the human body. And it also turns out, by the way, that when you're exposed to an RF signal, and your gut is exposed, there's what is called DevC. DevC is a biome of the stomach, a bacteria of the stomach. It actually elevates as a result of exposures. So we know there are very real scientific changes that occur to the human body. If you're not careful, they potentially become more serious, as Edwin was saying. It debilitates to the point where the mobility of the human is compromised. And so can that be something that you can recover from? And the answer is yes, you can, if you are aware that you need to be concerned about exposures. If you understand the challenge where there is potential impact to the human body, there are precautionary measures you can take, minimizing exposures, rearranging your technology around you to minimize the a laptop right next to your body is much more dangerous than at 5 feet, a meter and a half away. So by simply removing that transmitter and moving it farther away from the human body, you reduce that exposures and the potential impact of the human body. The efficacy of those transport signals are less and less as you go farther away. Simple precautionary things you can do will help. What was interesting, Edward mentioned something about food. Food is actually pretty important, right? Right? It's like the human body, if it's nourished correctly, can be resilient. And when it's not correct, you're more susceptible. So it's not like it's a 24-hour cycle concern when you're exposed, not a transient concern at the time of exposure. If you sleep at night and you get a good amount of sleep, the mitochondrial cell recovers and repairs, and it allows the body to recover. That's all about food, exercise, all sorts of different things. And so there's a lot of things we can do to help our human body being aware of it. In general, I like to talk about the Wi-Fi transmitter as a bee with a stinger. The more bees you have in a room, the more likely it's going to bother you. So you want to reduce the number of bees in a room, and that actually helps your body deal with those less and less exposures. So it's simple stuff you can do that really does help. And you sleep right, you eat right, you exercise right, all of those things help. And then, of course, I think Edwin was hinting to the physical world, where if you don't use a Wi-Fi and you use an Ethernet connection, you now are eliminating that Wi-Fi transmitter. So the more and more that you can build infrastructure in the buildings we work in and the homes we live in, that kind of exercise also works towards reducing exposures. I mean, for me, it's to an extreme. When you really want to protect yourself, particularly in your home environment, particularly when you sleep at night, you want to make sure that there is no transmitters in the room. So I talk about the sanctuary of the bedroom. It's very important. No routers in the room, no cell phones in the room, no tablets in the room, and you're minimizing the exposures because you're taking out that exposure source. That's sort of fairly important to do because a Wi-Fi signal mucks around with your brain when you're trying to sleep, as does the blue light coming from your monitor of your tablet. So if you're reading and you're reading just before you go to sleep, there's the monitors of today's monitors, they have a high intensity blue light component that being transmitted from it and it going into your eye. Inside your eye, there's a what do they call it? Cryptoprotein that actually is the back of the eye that recognizes the cryptochrome protein. That's what it is, and it monitors blue light. You go to sleep when there's no light in a room for years and years and years and years. All of a sudden, you have a blue light, and the little switch in the back of the eye that turns on the melatonin doesn't turn on. So you have problems sleeping at night. So there are things you can do to help the body become resilient to exposures by minimizing those exposures, eating properly, sleeping properly, and exercising.
I agreed totally. When it comes to the food, we must eat sensibly, okay? And so eat naturally, whole food. And that one because it contains a lot of the phytochemicals and also nutrients, like for example, the minerals and the vitamins, and that have the very strong anti-oxidative effects on the body. And sleep-wise, I think Singaporeans, most of them are having the sleeping disorder, might be in 90% or even more, close to 100%. Partly because I think Singapore, even though we are small, but we are, heavily and brightly lit at night, and everywhere, So much so that actually I have, because I live in flat, I have a corridor outside. I have a light, outside on at night throughout the whole night. So it disturbs my sleep, of course, because the light will go into my room. So what I'm going to do, I install a shield. Just a simple cupboard, so I just cut into size and stick on top just to shield away the lights. Yeah, so that that one would not affect the melatonin secretion. Yeah, so I have the heavy curtains installed so that to make sure that the lights cannot be penetrated into my room. So I sleep in not the total darkness. You still got some lights, here and there, but basically I have a very good sleep, But recently, because there's one of my former colleagues, she suffered from the sleepless night practically every day, for the past about three months. That one, which is pretty serious to me. Okay, so how about having said this and that, how to shield ourselves away from the EMF? Even though I'm saying that you can't ask your neighbor on top of you, the higher floor and the lower floor, or the beside you, left and right, to off their Wi-Fi at night. But at least you can you off your Wi-Fi when it is not in use, and put the smartphone and other devices, away from your body. I understand that in Singapore, there are many people, especially the youngsters. Okay, younger generations, I think they will sleep with the smartphone next to them. I think this is not advisable. My phone at night, I program it, to be off, from 11 p.m. all the way to the 7 a.m. to be automatically off, and it's never come close to my sleeping space. It's about 10 feet or 3 meters away. Yeah, so. And I never allowed anything with, when I sleep, I never allowed any transmitting device to be close to me. Perhaps just the fan. But the fan itself, I'm using the inverter kind of fan. That means it runs on a DC. So the EMF is very minimal. Yeah. Thank you.
So, Dr. Daniel and Edwin, thank you so much for all that we've unpacked so far. So I'd like to jump into a bit of the problem and the solution. So it seems to me that there are two kinds of people that needs to hear what we have to share today. The first one are people who are potentially impacted by it, potentially sensitive. How do we help them? And there's another another segment of people who are experiencing it on a daily basis that increases the risk of future complications, future health issues. So these are the kind of two people I'm looking at. How should we help them? Does it go about educating them, or proving certain things to them, or talking to governments about it? What are some of your thoughts, Dr. Daniel?
To start, up to 20% of the world population is electric hypersensitive. That was half it 5-10 years ago. So we know it's increasing as the exposures are increasing. And so we know that if you're one of the 20% and you're not today, you could be in the future. So it's really important that those who have it understand where the sources are, and those who don't understand the potential problems. So education is pretty important. It turns out that when you have electric hypersensitivity, as Edwin was pointing out, it can be in the gut. It could be in your brain. It could be. There's so many different ways of influencing your body. Your headaches. You have tingling in your fingers. I mean, it's ringing in the ear, tendonitis. All of these things are directly correlated to electromagnetic radiation exposures. But so many people don't realize it's the router sitting next to your desk that's creating the problem. It's not your body just decided to have ringing in the ears. And it is more and more important that we educate. We, of course, educate. Very much a part of what we do is try to help people understand what science knows about the subject matter. Science knows a lot. I often like to provide a correlation between other industries in the past that have had similar models of doing business. The smoking industry, when I was very, very young, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, when I was very, very young, I smoked cigarettes to be a big man. And it turned out at that time, science actually knew there was a direct correlation between smoking a cigarette and cancer. And so it turns out that when human beings introduce technology, it sometimes takes a very, very long time to understand the problem. And in this case, it took 50 years before anybody really, or 40 years before anybody really understood when you smoke a cigarette, there's a direct correlation to the cancer you get in your lung. But it took a long, long time. And that's what is a parallel, in my opinion, to where we are today. This technology that's around us has not been around us for very long. And science, pure science, independent science, almost exclusively shows that there's a direct correlation to exposures. But the general population hasn't really fully grasped that understanding. And interestingly enough, some parts of the world do better at understanding it than others. Australia, for example, there's a pretty strong contingency of people who support caution about where they put electronics, how they build transport, cell towers close to schools. All those kinds of things are, in some parts of the world, seem to be better understood than in other parts of the world. So we really need to somehow educate the people around us and help them understand what the science says and what they may want to do about that science in their own lives. Because literally it's they who are affected, and it's their lives that are affected.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Daniel. And I think that brings me to an experience, a conversation I had with one of the health practitioners in Singapore. And what I noticed that every time they have a consult, 90% of the time, one of the recommended steps for recovery was to use something called a grounding sheet. So it feels like when we talk about addressing the issue, there's the way of reducing exposure you talked about, eliminating it, and my engineering mind comes towards what you've developed, shielding it. I'm thinking about, are there ways to neutralize the effect? Are there ways to buffer against the electromagnetic forces?
So
it feels like this has to go in.
Jen, there are like grounding, for example. The body is a capacitor. It absorbs energy around us, and it can be excessive energy we don't need in our bodies. So when you walk on a beach where your feet are in the sand, you're grounding yourself to earth ground. And that's a good healing process for the human body. It's drained of the interference of static electricity in the human body. So yes, grounding does help by reducing excess forms of energy, electrical energy that's in the human body that does potentially influence the human body in a negative way. If you use a cell phone and you put it to your head and you have a grounded pad underneath, that does not help you. So, you have it on your head. So you got to know that there are benefits of grounding that are good, but excessive grounding is not necessarily good. Another example is when you have a grounding pad underneath the bed you sleep. Grounding pads, electromagnetic radiation looks for a grounding source. So if you have a convenient grounding source in a room underneath your bed, RF signals around your bedroom are being attracted into that pad through you. So is a grounding pad a good thing under your bed? There's a debate. I personally believe that attraction is far more dangerous than not using it. And so you got to know that. But there are other things you can do as well. As you were pointing out, you can shield a device from, which is a specialty of my team. That's what we specialize in. And there are benefits if you're using a cell phone for 3 minutes a day. You never have to worry about any serious impact to the head. But if you're using it hours and hours a day, after 10 years, what happens to the body is it accumulates that exposure, and you're 3 times more likely to have frontal lobe cancer as a result of that cell phone use. So it can get pretty serious if you become a heavy user, what they call a heavy user, and don't understand the potential impact over time. And believe it or not, there's also, we've alluded to it a little bit, there's the eating. When you have lettuce today, lettuce has 10 times less iron than it did 100 years ago because we've depleted the soil we grow our food. So sometimes the body lacks the vitamins it needs, the minerals it needs. And so sometimes a good supplement that fulfills that gap also helps the body be what we refer to as resilient under exposure. So these are a couple of things you can do. And of course, there's so many others that we can continue talking about. But Edwin, what are you thinking?
Yes, I totally agree with Dan. When it comes to the food, with the proper, the ingestions of the food and nutrients, it serves a few purposes. One is to rebuild, to replenish the cells, to repair the damage, and the other is the antioxidants. The phytochemicals in plants, it helps to neutralize the so-called free radicals, and that before it does the damage to the cells. Okay, and at the same time, the body, if you keep your body's, the constitutions to be more towards the alkalines than the acidic, your body's immunity will start to be strengthened. So much so that actually it helps persons to be resilient about the attacks. In our life, we are full of all kinds of challenges. Take for example, in Singapore, we tend to eat a lot outside food. Okay, we seldom cook at home. So outside, the chemicals and all these are causing the problems here without our knowledge. Take for example the preservatives, additives, the MSGs, and all this, so on and so forth. Definitely, we need to have the nutrients from the food we eat. But then again, because we eat so much of the highly processed food, if we can eat back to say 100 years ago, the tomato will be more nutritious than the tomato now. Potato the same, spinach the same. So I just wondering, not talking about 100 years ago. Take for example, way back about 50 years ago, the tomato I ate in my village is feel more satisfying and sour as compared to the tomato now. Now the tomato is huge and big and looks delicious. Okay, but then again, when it comes to nutrients, I suspect it's less than as compared to the last time. So we are having the problems here, and definitely when it comes to the EMF, we need the proper nutrients. So of course, there are people against taking the supplements, saying that supplements are all bad. But to me, from the first day I start to know about the nutrition and all this, I say that you have to supplement the nutrients if necessary. You might not need to take it day in, day out, every day. But then again, in certain period, when your sensitive immunity is already compromised, you feel that it's more stressful, your energy start to diminish, and that time perhaps we should have some help from the supplements. This is how I come about. I love supplements, but then again, not necessarily I'm going to take it every day. Yes.
Edwin, you were referring to an imbalance of antioxidants to free radicals. That's called oxidative stress. So the body is in a stressful state, and that's the typical conversation. It's a oxidative stress. That doesn't really describe what's going on in the body as a result of that oxidative stress. Everyone suspects it's bad, and it is, right? But it's also, when you see a bear in the woods, you run. There's an automatic body response that occurs in the human body, and there is what is called cell danger response. The cell itself sees a toxin, and the cell itself reacts to that toxin, and that's called cell danger response. That's what is the cascading effect that you have to start to fix at the source, which is down to the cell level. So, Edwin, as you were pointing out, there are certain kinds of missing vitamins, maybe minerals, that offset that response. And that's important for resilience, as you said. I agree.
So to round up all this, we've gone not just on EMF, but we're talking about invisible forces, the interplay between the EMFs, it's invisible, but then there's also the depletion of nutrients in our food. And there's also the lifestyle-induced maybe anxieties of interacting with too many mobile devices, too many things. So where do we go from here? Looking to the future for the next generation, what would you say is a workable framework or strategy of attacking this? I mean, radiation is not going to go away. We're so used to it and we benefit so much from it. So what is the longevity or the sustainable approach forward? What are your thoughts, Dr. Daniel?
So what we've been talking about in terms of food and exercise is the circadian rhythm, right? The human body has a cycle that we have to optimize throughout that cycle, whether you eating, exercising, sleeping, all of those things all have to be in harmony, or there's imbalance. Moving forward, it tends to be education. And by the way, the human body 100 years from now will figure out what it's doing when it's exposed. So 100 years from now, I'm not sure it's going to be a problem. It's because the body doesn't know what to do with it now. And so in that interim, you need to educate and make sure that your body's not impaired to the extent where it can get severe. And it can. When I mentioned the National Toxicity Program, we in the business always knew the frontal lobe was growing 2 times compounded each year for the last 10 years. We know it's been increasing, right? What I didn't realize, or many of us didn't realize, the heart itself became tumorous and some cancerous. So we know the body parts react to it differently, and it can be pretty serious. Thyroid, if you have Wi-Fi exposure, fluoride, and a mutated cell, you can get cancer. It's the RF piece that's doing it. So there's so many different parts of the body that can be affected. We really need to educate in that window where we're still all exposed. So help people understand what it is and maybe what actions they can take. In addition to that, and you've been alluding to this, Jen, when you think about building stuff, is there ways of building better structures that has less impact, negative impact, if it's structured with wiring that is shielded and doesn't impact the environment it's in? And so there's a lot of those parts you got to worry about. But education is the key of that, in my opinion. That's what drove us to write the book. There was a lot of confusion in the industry, and the facts were not very clear, or it seemed. And that's because you have factions. You have industries that have a vested interest in the trillions and trillions of dollars per year versus the scientist who maybe has a differing opinion. And it's the classic argument within the environment. And we have to continue to educate whatever forms we have. And that's a good thing ultimately if it influences people. And we have ourselves done that, and others around the world are doing it, including you guys. So I think it's important work we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, it's kind of like the business of education and preserving, humankind forward, and that's what we're all here for. Let's jump into problems contextual to Singapore. Edwin, what would you say are the top 1 or 2 things that is a burning problem in Singapore related to EMFs that perhaps we can ask Dr. Daniel his opinion on?
I want to seek a total solution. There's once or twice. There are customers, living in the private housing, came to us to look for the total solution package, whereby they want the total shield. Okay, so but as I said, just now, that the solution is always the piecemeal, not in total. So during the discussions, I listen and I start to sense that is it possible to have a solution package whereby people more or less, they can see it from, say, from the EMF, from the external source, because we are very dense. Is it possible to have a curtain shield or the ground sheet shield for those ultra sensitive to the EMF? And at the same time, of course, we need to educate. I agree with Dr. Dan that we need to educate. It's no doubt that education takes a long time to be effective.
Right.
Sometimes, for years, it's very slow. And I know it because I've been educating the public for so many years. The result is not, if we were to look at it critically, I don't think it's that effective. But then again, since that they are listeners, even if they are in a minority, we have to keep on educating people, getting themselves to be ready for the next generation to come. That means they need to protect themselves, away from the excessive damage caused by the EMF radiation. So this is one of them. For this reason, I have two approaches. One, actually, on the personal level, we are talking about the food, the lifestyle. I, for one, unless it's absolutely necessary, I, for one, seldom use the phone, okay? Yeah, the phone is always away from me. I don't put it inside my pocket and don't carry around. Wherever possible, I just leave it there on the table. I will just walk away. So there are people start to complain to me that I'm not so easily accessible. Okay. This is also the education to tell people how to stay away. Prevention is always better than cure. But at the same time, if we have a package whereby we sell the package and teach the people how to, on one hand, how to stay away from the harmful way, at the same time, how to shield themselves. And it will be, I think, is very meaningful. Yeah, so in particular in Singapore, because I think our EMF interference will be much higher. Across just might be a foot of the wall, there will be another household. Perhaps I think they put a router. There are others wireless devices just next to the wall. So of course, distance is very important when it comes to the intensity of the radiation. But I still believe that if you go look around, I think a lot of there will be cumulative effects of the EMF that we cannot ignore. Yeah, so total package.
Edwin, I'm glad you focused on resident or private, because we can talk about an environment to some level we can control. And you are pointing at some of the things that we can do. We call that the precautionary measures. There are precautionary measures you can take. There are actions you can take to help reduce it. I'll start with the bedroom because I consider that so important for recovery and resilience. And there are technologies on the market where your service, your electrical service, comes into the home and goes into, and it's distributed around the room or around the house. It turns out that if there's caution about that wiring, and it's not in all the walls, but it's minimized in the walls by running in conduits within the building, that reduces those exposures. There are actually devices that when wiring goes into a bedroom, when you go to a hotel room and you need your key to turn on the power and then turn off the power, right? Have you been in those kinds of hotel rooms? Well, that's like in private residence too. You can actually switch on and off the power into that room so there is no low frequency radiation. So that's another thing you can do. A smart meter. Everyone panics about a smart meter. Well, it turns out the power is less than a cell phone, acts like a cell phone, and if you have it in your garage, out on the wall of the outside of your garage, and you have your bedroom 20 meters away, it's not a problem. It's the distance is far enough where it's not a problem. So you can engineer the services into the building and minimize those kinds of exposures. So you're coexisting, getting the modern service, but also protecting your family. So there are things you can do in the room. And then we talked about the bees in the room before, where you don't turn on things you don't need. You hardwire things you can hardwire. And so there are things you can do that are very practical, easy to do thing. Wi-Fi. You don't need a Wi-Fi in the middle of your house. Whereas in the living room where all your family sits, it can be in the garage and still work. Because there's a strong distance from that. So your exposures begin dropping until your body figures out how to handle it, which is 100 years away. So there are things you can do that are very effective. And we haven't talked about 5G, but I will, because you understand 6G, and that's 900 gigahertz. Right now, today, we're at 1.5 gigahertz. Wi-Fi's are at 2.4 gigahertz. You know, the speeds are very low, and they're very different than what we have in the fifth and sixth generation. It's not that there's transmissions; they're much faster. That in itself is not the problem. It's that the power levels to drive that signal for the distance is much higher than a cell phone. A cell phone is 1.6 watts, as I said, typically, or 2 watts around that, I think in there where you guys are. But a typical small cell site transmission is 60 gigahertz, orders of magnitude faster. And what can you do in a home about that? Well, there are walls wallpaper you can put up on the wall where that small cell site is. So it's trying to transmit into the house, but it's prevented because there's a shield in front of that transmitter. So you can get a house pretty safe if you use all these tools. Commercial's different, but there are procedures you can do there that can help as well, which we can talk about if you like.
My concern is, of course, those practical the measures, can be done. So I don't have further questions. The question, most important thing is to tell people to be aware of the problem. So once they know the problem, they will start to seek out a solution.
Yeah, and I really resonate with the idea of educating, and I'm learning from both of you who are much senior than me. And the question that came to me was, if not us, then who? Because they are not in the know, we are in the know, and if we don't educate, who else there is? So it's like a responsibility, minimally, right, to get that out. And you can stand for it because there's science. You can proudly stand and do that thing. I have one question for Dr.
Jen,
Bennett,
about that. I always refer to, there are governance bodies in all of the countries around the world. And it's not unusual that they lag in their standards. And so there's always this debate that exists. Because that's a fact, I talk about the architect of your own destiny. You own the problem. They don't, because they're not going to necessarily ensure that that's safe for you in your environment, although ultimately they do. It's just always a lag in that as well. So you are the architect of your own destiny. It's your obligation to understand the problem through education, and you choose what to do about the facts you learn in your own life. So I certainly agree with you, Jen. It is really something that you have to take actions to do, and not hope others will do it for you. Because so far they're not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But then again, the reality is, if you look at how it's evolving, there's the tech drive to advance and test and improve, and whatever factors that motivate them to go in that direction, versus being a little bit more careful and concerned with all these things. So if you don't, as you said, take personal responsibility for it, then you'll be just one of those figures that when the shit hits the fan, you'll be wondering why it happened and why nobody told me about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's good. Can we go a little bit into some of your Defender Shield product lines? So with all your past experiences, and I know from your background as an RF expert, inventor, you've got all the credibility, the credence, and the know-how to come up with products. And so Defender Shield claims to be the trusted world's leader in EMF protection and as well as 5G radiation. Tell me just a little bit, tell us a little bit what motivates you and what inspires you to design the products that you have in the way that they are. Like you have mobile phones, you have pregnancy protectors and laptops. What is your inspiration and goal for that?
Jen, it turns out that it's sort of not by accident that I sort of understand this stuff, because I was in the telecom space. I was the organization that defined the standard. I was the organization that brought the technology to the networks that provided that service. So, and I was the one at that time in the past that had no clue that it affected humans. I was more concerned about one piece of electronics interfering with another piece of electronics. That was sort of my job, not how it interfered with a person or an individual. So I had a fairly good understanding of these things because of the roles I had. And then years ago, 15 years ago, my sons were visiting, and my wife says she wants grandchildren. And that laptop on your lap can't be good for you. And I said to her, nah, the power levels are too low. There's no way a laptop can influence the male sperm. But then I thought about it a tiny bit, and I had never really done the research to see if there was an impact or not. And sure enough, even back then, science knew that after 3 or 4 hours of that kind of exposure, as much as 25% of the male sperm was modified mobility or immobile completely. So all of a sudden, something I didn't understand, I had a better understanding of. There is a real impact. And it turns out I was a reasonable subject matter expert on technology and mechanical, and the mechanical. I'm a mechanical engineer by design. I was in the electrical world my whole life, so I designed materials to protect my boys, literally. And so that's where we started. It was like I was naive and I was in the business, but now I had a better understanding that there were some things I could maybe do. And then as it evolved, I wanted to try to give this to others, not just my family. And that's how we actually got started. And then 5G came along, and all the technologies in shielding do not work at the higher rates. So I continue my development pathway on technologies that actually do the shielding at the higher rates. And why am I concerned about it? Well, in 6G, it's up to 900 gigahertz. That's almost a terahertz. That's beyond visible light. It's almost X-ray kind of technology. And an X-ray is ionized radiation, as you may know, not non-ionized. And that disrupts the electron in a cell, in an atom around the nucleus. So as you increase there's a change on the impact of the human body. We know that. And so because we started where we did, just continue the pathway of providing protection for the devices close to the body.
Yeah, I think as you're talking about that, it feels like instead of spending so much time developing forward, we could spend more time settling ourselves first, our health and all our longevity issues, our well-being issues, right? I think we've gained a lot of insight from you, Dr. Daniel, on how to protect ourselves against the harmful effects of EMF radiation. Dr. Daniel, for those people who would like to learn more from your work and follow you, how can they do so?
Well, of course, I always suggest people reading Radiation Nation. That was a book about, Radiation Nation, and it is a book that identifies the science, it identifies things and actions you can do if you consider them a concern, some precautionary measures, exercises, and probably one of I wrote it for your grandmother. I didn't write it for an engineer. I wrote it for people to understand it because it's complicated, but it's important knowledge for people to know. So the book is Radiation Nation, and I always encourage that. If you're interested in understanding a little bit more about the science, I have a website, Defender Shield, that I have just a section just on the sciences. So you can read and educate yourself on the subject matter and learn a bit more, and then you have a bit more knowledge about what the problem may look like. Should you be looking for personal protection of some form, that's also on Defender Shield. And you can find products that help from a cell phone to your eyes with blue light. We actually have shielding, a blue light shielding product. So we try to get the gamut of all exposures in a form that's helpful. And by the way, the pregnancy, that was pretty important to me. It turns out that there was a study in San Francisco, U.S. San Francisco, a couple of years ago, in which they gave monitors, RF monitors, to women in the first trimester. And they measured their exposure. And what they found was when the radiation got higher, they were 3 times more likely to have a miscarriage in the first trimester. So we know those kind of exposures can be very serious. And that's why we did the pregnancy blanket. It was for that reason. We tried to minimize the exposure in the womb of a woman because it can happen. ADHD, they think, potentially has a source in the womb, and it evolves as the child grows, but its starting point could be the womb. So we don't know a lot of things, but we can take precaution with knowledge we have. I had a brilliant man, Dr. Prasad, and I told him that when you have a cell phone in the back pocket of a 12-year-old child, that distance can influence the egg of a human years from now. It can mutate that cell. And he was a RF, he's an X-ray expert. I mean, the expert in the world. And he said, I don't believe that's necessarily true, Dan. I said, okay, there seems to be studies that suggest it. And then he called me several years later and he said he had a woman in his clinic, a young woman, and she had a stillborn child with mutated cells they'd never seen before. And he called me up and said, you may be right. The distance to the cell was so close and mutated the cell of an egg. So there are some scientists that talk about that to an extreme, where it could literally reduce the number of people born in because they're influencing the cell or the sperm right from the origin. And by the way, you probably noticed that male sperm count has reduced over the last several years. I'm not saying it's directly correlated, as you said, Edward. It's hard to correlate some of these data without good facts, scientific facts. But it suggests that those things could be true. So why would you take a chance if you don't need to? As you said, take a cell phone and put it somewhere else where it's not close to you, and you're fine. If it rings, you can run, right? Why would you expose your body if you don't need to?
Dr. Daniel, can I just rewind back a little bit on where you said putting the phone on the backpack of a 12-year-old? Is that for a girl?
Yeah.
And you're saying that's
I
affecting the
was
ovary?
strictly talking about a woman and its potential. We have some scientists in the U.S., very well-known experts, that talk about that challenge. The problem he has, he doesn't understand statistics. He thinks the population will stop 3 generations from now. That would be true if everyone that put a cell phone in their back pocket, every girl that ever was 12 put it in the back pocket, that would be true, but it's not true. However, he believes, he's an expert of the breakdown of the cell, by the way. He was one of the first scientists who actually identified, Dr. Powell, how the membrane of a cell gets penetrated by calcium, and there's mutated cells as a result of the mechanical and chemical reactions within the cell. And there is clear scientific study that shows that direct correlation. So it's very real.
So basically what you're saying is like, if we neglect that and we allow the 12-year-old girl to keep in the backpack, and for years down the road, say when they're 18 and they're ready to become moms, then they might see those effects.
Yeah.
But until then, they wouldn't know.
Right, exactly. And they didn't know when they did it, or when they put it in their bra. I mean, it's crazy that they would put a cell phone in a bra. So they go to the doctor. Doctor, I have something going on in my breast. Well, take that cell phone away from it. And you won't. The studies we saw show directly where the woman would put a cell phone to the breast, that's where the cancer would focus. And very weird cancers, not traditional cancers. So we know that's true too. So you really need to be cautious when you have a cell phone around your body.
Super good insight there that we didn't know. Edwin, as Dr. Daniel was explaining all this, it brought me to my mind. In Singapore, there are lots of probably rising infertility issues apart from ADHD. What are your observations on the ground?
My observation, a few things. Just now, Dr. Dan talked about the breast cancer issue. Actually, when I do the sharing couple of years back, talking about the EMF and also the cancer, actually there are certain video footage showing that some women put their phone onto the chest, here, then it developed the cancer. This is always true, and the problem now, I saw in Singapore, I do not know how about the other countries. There's a prevalent kind of the phenomena that people, when they riding a train or public transport, or even in waiting for the transport to come, is always putting in the smartphone, the cell phone onto the pumps. Actually, it affects the body in many ways, So of course for today we are not going to elaborate onto this one, but it also affects the health, also including the posture problems, beside the radiation problems. My observation that in time to come, and I should see that more and more youngsters, they have emotional control issue. They will be out of control. Partly could be due to first a diet. Nowadays the diets actually, the milk we do drink and also the food we eat, the itself is over processed and denatured, okay, and it affects the temperament, temperamental problems, one or two. And another one is due to the intensified use of the radiation. Just now we mentioned about 5G, then very soon perhaps we go to the 6G. And 6G, I think, is very close to the microwave, terahertz. That one is uncharted territory. We are not so sure how it's going to hurt. But then again, on 5G, initially I'm quite worried with the introductions of the 5G. And in my house, I got, of course I got phone, but then again it's not always with me anyway. But then again, when we have to use a computer, it has to be. But then the way computer, at least a distant, as compared to the phone. So I suspect the emotional issue and also the cancer's problem will be more and more prevalence due to the environmental pollutions. One of which I think has a huge impact is partly because of the availability and also the very popular use of the cell phones, which is always on the palm, on the pockets here or at the back for the mail. This is how they have it. It's always in Singapore. Very serious, because when I take the public transport, I observed, especially for these 2 months, I saw that might be in one train, there's only one or two reading a book or doing nothing, but the rest all using the cell phones. This is serious because the usage also plays a very important part for the absorptions of the electromagnetic interference and force. Yeah. Very crowded. Very crowded. Serious.
Yeah, remember I talked about the bees, right? These are
Yes.
hornets. These are killer bees when they're all collected together. So,
Yeah.
I think we've covered so much that it's really good. That,
but by the way, Jenna, I do want to mention something. The electromagnetic radiation that's in our environment is known as a 2B carcinogenic by the World Health Organization. It is, in fact, considered a toxin, a probable carcinogenic. That's what that means. What's important about that is when the World Health Organization made that stand, there was not enough data to directly correlate cancer. It turns out that the National Toxicity Program, NTP, and the NAVIO are the data that would identify it as a cancerous toxin. And so my expectation is the next time World Health Organization reviews this, it will become a directly correlated toxin. And a 2B carcinogenic is arsenic. A 2B carcinogenic is the fumes from your gas. These are serious toxins in the environment that are potential causes of cancer. But it's serious, and people should know it is identified as pretty serious. It's just no one knows about it.
And that's also tricky terrain to speak about it publicly. When you finally have the data and you're ready to talk about it, there's going to be some challenge in that, how to present it, and the consequences and the ripple effects.
Right.
Who wants to bear that responsibility of bringing the word out? Yeah. So I think what we've covered here today was excellent for all our viewers in Singapore. It's really specific to what they need to hear. And I thank you, Dr. Daniel, for being a gift for here to share your wisdom and be here at this time in this generation where you're playing an important role. Up to this point, I hope you continue doing and supporting us here in Singapore. Before we end this, are there any final words of advice you'd like to give to the Singaporean and even the Malaysian people here? Dr. Daniel?
As I said, and I always end this way, you're the architect of your own destiny. You decide what you want to do in this environment. It has changed. It is recent. And in my opinion, an action needs to be taken. And the best likely action that's going to be taken is by you, no one else. So it's your problem. Please understand it is.
Yeah, it's our problem. Thank you for that. And Edwin, any words of advice or encouragement for the audience that will be listening in?
Similar to Dr. Dan, actually, in our life, we assign a lot of things, asking people to do it for us. But when it comes to the health, we need to take charge personally in order to protect our life, our health, as including our loved ones one. Yeah. So take charge. Don't assign your health away and by asking other people to take care of it. Yes.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for the time together. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all again.
Well, Jen, thanks so much for inviting me. I do really appreciate it. I think we had a good conversation today.
Thank you, Dr. Dan.
Well, thank you, Edward. Nice talking with you. So thank you again.
Nice, very, very nice,